Just how committed are companies worldwide to climate protection? The London-based Carbon Disclosure Project has been taking a closer look to see what measures companies are taking to combat climate change. Now, the institute examined 12,000 companies around the world, but only a fraction are committed to measures to stop climate change. Now, a mere 272 companies meet one of the three criteria needed for a top score, just 2% of all the firms surveyed. Companies must prove they are reducing emissions and that their climate protection plans stand up to scientific scrutiny. In Germany, just one firm, the flavor manufacturer Symrise, is judged to be a truly environmentally friendly company. In all, 14 German companies made it onto the list of active climate protectors, including rail operator Deutsche Bahn, Deutsche Telekom, steelmaker ThyssenKrupp and software group SAP. SAP is committed to climate-neutral operations by 2023, while ThyssenKrupp has pledged to produce its steel in a climate-neutral way in the future. Now, earlier, I spoke to Karen Pittel, director of the Center for Energy, Climate and Resources at Germany's IFO Institute for Economic Research, and I asked her why companies weren't doing more to rein in their emissions.
I mean, there's a couple of reasons. Recently, of course, the crisis, first the corona crisis and then the war of Russia on Ukraine, of course, basically put a dampener on all kinds of investment, and that also concerned climate protection investment. But on the other hand, there's some more basically underlying issues. So, for example, companies are still fearing that if they increase their costs by investing in climate protection, they might not be internationally competitive anymore. Then they might also wait and see whether there might be additional subsidies coming their way if they invest. And if they invest too early, they might not get them. So there's a number of different issues that prevent companies to invest at that scale as it would be needed.
With COP27 meeting right now, how are emissions globally to come down when companies in G7 countries, for example, fail to reach the emissions targets set by the Paris Climate Agreement?
And basically, on the one hand, there has to be more ambition in the national policies. There has to be more certainty also about future policies. So decisions have to be made quick and decisive. But on the other hand, also there has to be more international cooperation between especially the big emitters. But of course, as the global situation is at the moment, with China and the US being at loggerheads, but also with, of course, Russia, Europe, and the whole sanction situation, the question is whether that might be feasible.
So you don't see the real willingness for cooperation here, is that right?
I think there is an underlying willingness to cooperate with respect to climate protection, because all countries basically face the repercussions if they don't. But on the other hand, that is there's an overlay of the current political situation, which prevents many things to happen.
Now, speaking of the current political environment, the International Energy Agency says that the ramifications of the war in Ukraine could be propelling the use of renewables. Do you agree with that assessment? And when are we going to feel meaningful impact?
In principle, I do agree. I fear we will see in the short term basically a re-emergence of fossil energy, especially switch from gas to oil or coal. But at the same time, there's, of course, a large incentive now to kind of secure less expensive energy in the future, and that will be green. It's also less prone to uncertainty or fluctuations on international markets. So I think there will be this boom in investment in renewables, but it will take a couple of years. So we won't see it next year or the year after, but I think in the long term there will be some help basically for the decarbonization coming from this situation.
Karen Pittel, director of the Center for Energy, Climate and Resources at Germany's IFO Institute for Economic Research. As always, thank you.
Thank you.
And staying with the attempts to save the planet's climate, for decades, Norway has been extracting oil and gas from underneath the sea. Now it aims to use the very same experience to send CO2 emissions back into the ground. DW's Max Zander reports.
This building site doesn't look like much just yet, but the technology being put in place here in Norway could help cool down the planet. Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre has come to visit. He has made this project a top priority.
Towards 2030 and 2050, there's no way we can reach our targets without CCS. So take cement production. We will continue to produce cement. Take waste plants. There will be CO2 that you cannot do away with. You can capture it and you can store it safely. That is critically important.
CCS stands for carbon capture and storage. The Northern Lights project belongs to a Norwegian government program in partnership with energy companies Shell, Total and Equinor. Today marks the opening of the visitor center. Visitors from around the world should be able to learn from the experience gained here in Norway.
Construction here in Øygarden will go on for 1.5 more years, and after that the goal of Northern Lights is to store 1.5 million tons of CO2 each year underneath the seabed.
The idea? CO2 from carbon-heavy industries will be captured and brought to Norway by ship. From here it is pumped out to sea via pipelines and then injected into rock formations 2,600 meters underneath the seabed. The technology has been tested in smaller industrial projects in Norway since the mid-90s, where excess CO2 is pumped back into the ocean floor instead of releasing it into the atmosphere. Back on shore in the city of Bergen. At the Norwegian Research Center, scientists have been exploring the storage of CO2. Despite critics raising the issue of safety, researchers like Sarah Gasta believe there is little to worry about.
There's a lot of natural barriers underground that keep it from coming back up again. Then over time, nature sort of takes over and will eventually dissolve all of that CO2 and it'll form minerals, and these processes can take decades and hundreds of years. But the point is that nature will do its work and prevent that CO2 from being released again.
Storing carbon underneath the sea could help slow down global warming, but to really have an impact, it has to be done fast.